Hello and welcome to the No Wasted Days podcast, a show that celebrates self-knowledge by open-mindedly asking, what is it? What does it mean to have it? How can you get more of it? And how can you do the best with what you have? Today's journey towards answers to those questions and many, many more is shared with Michaela Juby, an amazing human being from Cape Town, South Africa, who is a shaman that works closely with different plant medicines, specialised visualisation practices, and conscious guided ceremonies to bring balance to whomever may need. We cover loads of lovely, rich ground in this episode, particularly things like how you navigate beyond certain triggers that you've experienced, or start to rewrite certain convoluted stories that have become present in your day-to-day life, and just genuinely access more of what you feel life can be at its best on your terms with your needs, as a really present part of that definition. Michaela also touches on shamanism and some of her experiences with ayahuasca and the tradition of a kind of shamanic practice, which is super duper interesting if you've, have some awareness of that lane of experience or not. But with no further ado from me, we'll get stuck right into the episode, and we join us setting up the episode and just keeping half an eye on a kind of decorative rock that is perilously perched on a shelf just above Michaela's head.
This rock fell onto my laptop keyboard the one day.
Yeah.
Without sounding too dramatic, I was not impressed.
It took you a second longer than normal to have a kind of slightly more philosophical or spiritual reaction.
To not react. Now I have a dent in my keyboard, and the rock is still there, and this table is not that stable, so I tend to
but I'd hate for your amazing presence to be interrupted by the
falling rock.
So yeah, feel free to move it if
it's safe. It's safe. If anything, it'll come down when it's supposed to. It's like just wants a little bit of a feature.
Yeah, you trust the universe and its impact on the rock. I did a great bit of research yesterday. I love the campfire channel. I'm all over the campfire. I think your biggest fan. In one of the videos, you talked about societal conditioning, which is something I'm really interested in, and that we are born as ourselves to some huge degree, and that can stay relatively intact until loosely the age of 7. After that, the conditioning that we're exposed to from the different areas of society starts to take over. But why do you particularly see our kind of born selves as our purest self? What leads you to that idea?
Sure, amazing. Well, thank you so much for the campfire and for listening to it. I think it's an incredible opportunity to share and to give information. So I'm really grateful for your questions. The whole idea of us being born actually came a lot from ayahuasca and my journey with ayahuasca. But if you think of the birth of a child, and the miracle of a soul being put into a vessel and that child coming into this world in that vulnerable state, from without sounding too airy-fairy, should I say, I'm going to give you both examples, both the understanding that I have and then the understanding that truly resonates with me from that. But when I was in my 3rd ceremony with ayahuasca while I was in Peru, I had a profound journey with her. She took me basically into my womb and where I was first created, and I saw my entire life as projected in front of me in the womb. And in that life and in that journey, I saw everything from start to finish in my personal existence on this planet as I am now, from when I was born up until the day I died. And then I watched myself move into the next part of my journey and created and moved into this state of inner peace this glowing yellow light. That's all it was. There was just this deep frequency. If you, I'll go deeper into that, of course, as like energy is frequencies, but there was this deep frequency, this deep sound, and just this glowing yellow light. And I got to a point in my journey, that time, where I had the opportunity to look back at everything, and I could choose. I could choose, if now that I've seen everything, do I want to go back and live it? Or do I want to carry on in this quote unquote afterlife, everlasting life, or whatever it may be, in whatever right anyone wants to believe in? There's no wrong way here. But I had that choice, and that choice was mine. My choice that I took from it was to come back and live this life and to be of service, to truly respect my soul's purpose for being here, because now I truly understand what it is I'm meant to do. And from that perspective, it was a deep lesson that I haven't yet shared fully in my Campfire channel, but it is sort of the catalyst in understanding this idea of remembering who you are. And if you look at a child when it's born, naturally it has its own interests, it has its own curiosity, it has its own favorites, it has its own reactions, and it's kind of already got its own vibe, but it's now having to learn how to move and flow in this frequency of life, in this reality, in this construction of time that we've created. And that's where the vulnerability of the child comes in. That's where the child clings to the parents for guidance, for teachings, to learn how to flow in this natural state. And that's where that's where the parents tend to project their own fears of what they don't want for their child onto their child. So the child who's trusting and vulnerable tends to move in this flow and truly just take anything that the parents give them, because the parents are working from the heart, working from love, but they're working with the cards that they are dealt with at the time. So they don't necessarily have that deep understanding until both are in their later years. But from ages 0 to 7, children become themselves. They grow into themselves because that light that they have within them starts moving in their vessel. They learn how to walk, they learn how to touch, they learn how to see, feel, speak. They get all their senses activated, and naturally, with the guidance of the parents, they can move into whatever interests they find in themselves. And it gives them that sense of light. It brings back that light that was already there. So that's the idea of sort of remembering who you are. You'll find, and I mentioned it in that episode actually, children will go out playing in the mud, playing and moving things and figuring things out, and parents will come, like as I mentioned, the one lady I saw was like, don't go into the sand, you'll make your dress. And I couldn't believe it. I really had to hold my tongue, but it was that whole idea where now a child is exploring, is feeling the earth, reconnecting to the land, speaking to the little creatures and spirits around them that they see and feel and exist within, and are now slowly closing their vision, closing their sight because of the don'ts, of the you mustn'ts, of the restrictions that their parents are putting on them.
Yeah, and I thought the sandbox story was actually an impeccable kind of example, because how innocuous is it in existential terms to get some sand on a dress or a little skirt or whatever it was, versus the curiosity, the exploration, the interest. I think there's something interesting to touch on with your exploration through Mama Aya, and this visual that you had around having lived your life or seen it from start to finish, and then having this choice. For someone that hasn't had access to that ayahuasca-led experience like you, that almost sounds like a model that you could create and repeat, that visualization or thinking about your life from on a start to finish and kind of end. I think there's a bit of Stoic wisdom. Imagine you had died, and that when you wake up again in the morning, this is a new chance to live. That almost seems like what the opportunity you were given, to have this insight in terms of your life being this fixed unit, but then actually, hey, what would I do given a second chance, or how would I shape or change this? As almost a very practical tool, as well as a entirely kind of plant-based or ayahuasca-led
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. It actually also gave me the opportunity now in my daily life. And as I said, I've moved in deep career paths. I've changed a lot of things in my personal life and in my career to follow my truth in it because of it, because I had the opportunity to really reflect on my projection, my trajectory, and really reflect on what I'm doing now for my greater good. And it's something that out of ceremony and months after, in fact, something that my partner and I speak about all the time is we constantly, instead of seeing it as work, we ask ourselves how we are being of service and how we are truly helping for the greater good and for the good of all. Because this whole idea of work and draining and stressing yourself out, it's something, and sorry to digress, but it's something that I've noticed, obviously, being in South Africa specifically, we have a lot of poverty. And with the poverty, it's a huge ripple from apartheid and where we've come from. And it goes extremely deep in a lot of different ways, a lot of different tribes. And it's very difficult to mention all perspectives in this, but the one that I do want to sort of focus on is watching people clean. We have an abundance of cleaners cleaning houses, sweeping streets, doing things to just earn money to make a living. But these cleaners travel from so far to get to work, to clean on time, to travel into the space where the people who could clean for themselves are now paying them to clean so they could be earning a living. But because of apartheid, there was this sort of deconstruction of needing an education to earn a living and needing said education to create a CV that is approved for you to earn a living. And now in the space that we are and the way that we're growing, especially our generation, having the opportunity to just follow whatever we believe in consistently and create something from it, regardless of our education. I personally have not been asked once what I've studied, and I personally have grown a lot in a lot of different facets of my life. But there is such a limitation on the can't. The can't because of a deconstructed idea of what education means and what you have to do about it, that those said cleaners who perhaps have this deep dream of starting a cafe, for example, something so simple that they can't do because they haven't got the finances or they haven't got the education or they haven't got these facets that truly aren't actually that relevant in the greater scheme of things. So instead, they put themselves into the minority, and the societal growth that has been happening has kept them there. And it's just something that's truly been in my mind lately about just how we perceive this reality, and what it means to us. But going back to the vision and what I did see coming into these spaces now and having this opportunity to really, wherever I am, and this is where I'm getting at the perspective of I chose to come back. So every time I'm in a situation that I might feel uncomfortable about, every time I'm in a situation where I feel overwhelmed or anxious or I'm not really feeling the vibe around me, is that you are exactly where you are meant to be all the time because you chose to be there. And that's the greater idea that I really, the perspective that I got from it, that I show deep gratitude rather for being in a situation that's obviously providing me a deeper lesson, that's giving me a sense of growth, that's helping me connect to whatever trigger I am feeling that might have a deeper meaning to who I am becoming. And that's where I find that gratitude from that lesson.
Yeah, and it's an extremely, extremely powerful insight, because I can think of a number of people in my life who've, because of a series of traumas that they have experienced, have this background narrative in their brains that they didn't choose to be here, because their parents were a certain way and they attribute a certain level of their discomfort or pain in life to those people. So if they had made different decisions, then they would be free from this pain. Because that's the other end of where you
Exactly.
sit. I don't know if if that pattern or narrative, you've met anybody in life that paints a picture like that, and whether you would have anything to say or advocate to someone who's in that position and how they could, ebb towards the slightly more in service holistic position that you find yourself in.
Sure. I mean, it is the complete opposite. It's so interesting because my brother once said that to me. He
Mm,
said, Michaela, I didn't choose to be here. I
yeah.
was brought into this world. But it's simply that goes back to that conditioning mentality, right? Is that in shamanism, there are different types of characters that people can play. There's the victim, which is the one that we're going to speak about now in this situation, where life is working against me. I'm not working with life.
Mm,
And life is happening to me. The victim is very much a woe is me. I'm looking at my traumas. I notice and I know everything that is triggering me. And I'm aware of all my traumas, but I am not going to work through them.
mm,
I'm only going to sit with them and feel them and really go deep into my darkness. Then
mm,
you get the rescuer. The rescuer is someone who doesn't want to focus on their emotions, their traumas, their triggers. So they actually thrive with the energy from the victim because they can help the victim. They
mm,
people pleasers. They work with the energy of the victim to truly ignore and distract others from giving them attention from their own pain. It happens a
mm.
lot with single mothers. Single mothers tend to be rescuers because they want to help their children move out of the pain that a single mother raising children might bring.
Yeah.
Then you get the projector. The projector is someone who doesn't want to even acknowledge that they have any problems, but because they feel specific things, they end up projecting outwards and reacting immediately, reacting instead of responding to specific situations and how that might affect them. They work hand in hand with the victim because the victim absorbs all that woe is me energy and the projector shoots it out, gives it to the victim. It happens a lot in like workspaces because people
Yeah.
might not know how to handle their stress very well. So, it sucks when a boss screams at you or for not doing a good job, or,
Mm,
when you're in a situation and things aren't going the way you want, but the people around you aren't working through their emotions correctly. So they're throwing it at you. And
mm.
that's again what I was sharing in one of my videos about returning that energy back to
Yeah.
who it to, which we'll
Which
get
is a
into.
thought I loved because I don't think I treat myself enough to that. I give myself that kind of permission. There's a bit in the No Wasted Days kind of journaling format where you can say, okay, the thoughts or feelings I want to leave behind today are. So there's a
Yeah.
little bit of that detachment from certain energies, but I love
Mm.
that reframe. It was a bit more assertive. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to carry this.
But then going back to answer your question about the choice and how to help people in sort of recreating that narrative on I didn't choose to be here, but I was created to be here, is you did choose to be here, but you didn't choose to be here as you are here now.
Mm,
You chose to be here as a different version of yourself that has been so lost to you that you need to remember who you are. You need to remember who you are by truly going back to what you define as interests, what you define as beauty, what love means to you, all these simple things that were taught to you, and go back to the core memories of why those are distorted, and go back to that idea to understand how much you did, in fact, choose to be here and what convoluted that story for you.
think it's certainly extremely powerful to see it as a convoluted story from which you can return to a certain more authentic, wholesome, original idea. Even if it would seem to me that if someone had a really deep version of that convoluted story, they might struggle to articulate or define a previous moment which felt a lighter, more more themselves.
Mm.
It may be closer to kind of like a feeling or an energy something a bit less consciously rational and articulatable, but at least a moment where they felt pure and like, hey, that they were expressing themselves completely in this like effervescent, very engaged fashion. Or at least that would be my hypothesis. I don't know if you run into people in your shamanistic practice or anything of the other kind of support you give where they just really struggle to articulate these slightly more authentic moments from the past or deeper laying interests.
It's actually, that opens up quite a beautiful facet of conversation. But with what I do in my practice and what shamans do in their own right is we work as mirrors. We are simply mirrors to the people who speak to us in their own truth and vulnerability. And we open the space and we hold the space for them to share their truths. So you'll find a lot of the time when someone's speaking to you, they are telling you, I mean, let me rephrase that. It's often that you'll hear someone say, I'm great at giving advice, but not taking it. It's that sort of idea where you know what to do, but you can't grab it. You can't reach that because there's something limiting you. There's something keeping you stuck in that sense of victimhood. You rather be stuck in a space of comfort, so to speak, a space of relatable pain that you have always worked in, that you've become acquainted to, instead of releasing that and stepping into the discomfort and what that might hold. That a lot of people tend to just stay stagnant. And it's actually quite interesting. It's a very big theme for this full moon, is about what is keeping you in that stagnant energy and what are you afraid of in your state to move into that discomfort. Because if you think of fears, they don't really exist, right? Your fears are the ideas that you've placed on yourself to limit your own personal growth. And what is it in those fears that you have found meaning? You have found meaning in? What is it in those fears that are restricting you from growing? And then you'll find, by reflecting on these small aspects, and this is what I do it with my clients, is we go deeper into not necessarily what your triggers are, but what is stopping you from getting to where you want to go. Why do you feel that you can't get there? Recently, one of my clients, we actually spoke about this yesterday, was about she doesn't feel worthy of her dreams because, and this is what we went into, is not feeling seen as a child, not feeling deserving of her love and affection that she wasn't receiving from her parents, that it rippled into this idea of not actually deserving the things you want for yourself. And it's this idea of this fear, this projection of the self that you've created in your mind that has limited your own growth. It's the idea of creating the destination so that you don't start the journey. In your mind, you've already finished. In your mind, you've already found yourself failing along the way. But changing the narrative and this whole journey with the shamanic practices that I offer are quite literally to, what if it all works out? What if everything that you're doing for yourself actually is exactly what you're supposed to be doing? Because where did that dream come from? Where did that idea come from in your mind? Follow it, see where it goes. Why not? Why not? Because you might fail. What are you doing now? Succeeding. Are you happy with what you're doing now? Because if you are, fantastic. But what you're doing now, are you happy about it because it's working? Or are you happy because it's filling your soul? Because you are being of service and because you are truly thriving in your passion. You are working in your passion. You are not drained. You are not tired. You are not broke. But you are truly grateful for where you are and what you're doing. Because if that isn't the case, we can realign you.
This is not a traditional podcast ad break. Instead, It's just a small pause in today's podcast to share that, in case you didn't know, alongside the podcast and this super lovely, insightful conversation that you're listening to with Michaela, that I hope you're really enjoying, because she's just so insightful and compassionate and spiritual and engaged and communicates all of that so clearly, that No Wasted Days has a platform of its own that is available on all good web browsers. At its heart, it's a daily journal which, courtesy of approaching 1,000 days logged by me and the thousands of hours spent building and thinking about the site, is perfectly placed to give each day a really smart yet remarkably simple and robustly safe structure. On top of this, each journal comes with a unique doc that takes all the great thinking you have done about yourself and the year ahead and allows it to stand the best chance of manifesting in your daily decision making. On top of this, every journal entry becomes a data point in your Insights Hub, where you can learn so much about how you felt, how much you've done, and dig into the exact behaviours, intentions and memories that connect most with your joy, purpose and growth. It will cost you absolutely nothing to sign up, and for that low fee you get access to all the key features. Nothing is trapped behind a paywall. You can subscribe to remove ads or set up coaching with me to help you make the most of your data, but all features, access to insights and interactive experiences are there for everyone. So whether you are transitioning through a tricky moment in life, or would like to learn more about yourself in order to feel better and do more of the things you'd like to do, or would like to become more self-aware in order to become a stronger people manager, or have simply found some of the options or parts of the site exciting and interesting, please visit NoWastedDays.io, sign up for free and let me know how you get on. In the meantime, back to our conversation with Michaela.
People come to me with so many different reasons, and yes, of course, you must most definitely work through your triggers and your traumas to help you reach your most authentic self in whatever right that may be. But there's also so much beauty in just coming back to the present moment, that sometimes you can get lost in your past and you can get lost in the shadows of your past, exactly as you mentioned with someone saying, I didn't choose to be here, that you get stuck in this, oh my word, there's been so much trauma, there's been so much, you kind of overwhelm yourself on these things that are past already. There's nothing that can change. It's just about, here I am as I am, and who do I want to be from here, and how can I make the right steps to get there. And then with that growth, 100% you'll get triggered, but only when that trigger comes up, deal with it. Don't go deep into your childhood and sit with every single core memory that comes up and psychoanalyze it, because then you do get in a bit of a state of darkness, and it is quite tricky to kind of step out of that and remember where you are, not necessarily who you are.
The present moment as kind of refuge. He's like, from all of that discussion of trauma and triggers and past and unpacking it, analyzing it, just being here. And as I teed up before, and I think Mara, who's just coming in the background, would also echo this thought, our time we spent with you, you are unbelievably present. And I know you just done or had some, a particularly special time in Peru, but it was stark, versus the average conversation you'd have with the average person, your level of attentiveness and engagement with us, and, was kind of it stuck in my mind. How do you think you nurture and maintain that level of, hey, I'm here, not 1 second forward, not 1 second backwards, just here, do you think about that in a particularly practical way, or have some things that you do that can help you maintain and nurture that?
Beautiful, wonderful question. Firstly, thank you so much. I think it's so special. You never really get that sort of, I don't know, I guess that awareness from people. So I think that's really special that you also saw that, because I think where we were and in our time together, I think we saw each other, and I think that's what was so special about everything. It is definitely a multifaceted question, but the basis of it and the biggest part of our present moment is breathing and breath work. The largest idea of us as human beings being separate from the elements and the way that they move within us and the way that we exist in this planet are all coming from this life force, this breath. The idea of the inhalation bringing life and the exhalation bringing death. And how there's always this trust that there'll be another inhalation. There's always a present moment of breath, that you never think, I don't want to take this next breath out because I might never get one ever again. You know, there's never that thought. So there's also, it's simply about breathing a lot of the time. And it's actually a great story. I'm so happy I can share it. But I used to have 30% lung capacity and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe for most of my life. Of course, it was also my own childhood traumas, because you carry a lot of grief in your chest. But I couldn't breathe. And for years, I couldn't even walk upstairs without having an asthma attack. I couldn't walk. I couldn't do normal sports or activities. And it would always trigger and then it would go away. It was a very consistent thing till I was about 21-ish. And I went to a pulmonologist, a lung specialist, who told me that the only pet I could have is a fish because of my asthma. And he said that after analyzing my lungs, he says I only use the top half of my lungs. The bottom half of my lungs have actually just kind of they haven't had the strength to activate. And that's why I have asthma, because I can't fully use I was never taught how to breathe. So he says what he's going to do is cut me open and massage the bottom half of my lungs to bring that muscle back to life. And I kind of looked at him and waited for him to say, I've really been wanting a new car. Basically, it's what it sounded like to me. So I was just, obviously hard no. Thank you so much for your service, sir. But I really don't think that's going to work out for me. I'm going to go and see how else I can figure out with the knowledge that you've given me, because you're the first doctor who's told me that I don't use my lungs correctly. But I'd like to go deeper into that from a different perspective. So I found a physiotherapist who specialized in lungs, and she never touched me. She, in fact, taught me how to breathe. We sat in her class, in her room. She told me to put one hand on my chest and one hand just below my ribs and feel my breath. She said, if I'm only using the top half of my lungs, which she said I was, she also called me a mouth breather, which she just said it as an insult, and I was immediately offended, even though it was completely true, because my nose was always blocked. So I couldn't breathe through my nose. And what happens is your nose naturally cleanses the air that comes into your lungs, and it transfers it from cold to warm. Whereas if it comes into your mouth, it's an overwhelming amount of cold air. That's why when you're choking, you should actually close your mouth, and your nose will help you regulate that breath again. But going back to it, I put my one hand on my chest and one hand on my diaphragm, and she taught me how to use my full lung to breathe. So I closed my eyes and I simply inhaled, keeping the top hand from moving, and focused only on expanding and contracting my lower body. And it slowly brought in this intense energy and intense activation. We then went deeper into the practice, where she taught me how to focus deeply on my inhale, on pausing, and controlled exhale, and then pausing, feeling not, oh my word, panicky that I'm not breathing anymore, because that's also a huge catalyst in asthma, is it leads directly to anxiety attacks, because you shorten your breath and you panic because you're not breathing, but you're not breathing because you're panicking. So it's just that keeps going on, right? So it's about getting to that no breath, holding it, keeping that steady breath, and just being present with yourself in that moment. You get those divers. I don't know if you've seen them, but they hold and just go down for so long. It's incredible, but obviously that's to a much, much greater extent. But this idea of breathing, and that breath work, that inhale, exhale, is all you need to come back to the present moment. With that, there'll be a lot of things that will immediately distract you from the present moment. There'll be things that come up in your mind that pull you out of that moment. It's about now, when those come up, what are they? Why are you letting them distract you? And what can you do to prevent them from coming up? And then working in that.
Yeah. I find this extraordinary because obviously I've only known you for a relatively recent time and know you only perhaps a relatively few things about you. I think one of which is that you're a passionate kind of amateur boxer.
Yes.
So to imagine that you were once a person that couldn't quite access, the majority of their lung capacity, whereas now, I now see you kind of like cheering and waving after your boxing. Like, what's that been like as a transition? And I don't know, potentially a too deeply conceptual question. Did potentially a lack of breath when you were younger force you to have a bit more kind of responsibility or ownership over the breaths that you used? And could that be attributed in any way as like a catalyst to some of the wisdom and clarity you have about life and the world today?
A very good question. And the first thing that sort of comes to mind is Gabor Mate, who I'm
Mm.
obsessed with. He
Yes.
is honestly the prophet of this generation, and
I've thought of his name about 4 or 5 times on as you've mentioned different things about people having like care roles despite the fact that's not their authentic selves, and the kind
yeah,
of health cost to that persistent inauthenticity, despite the
exactly.
fact that it presents itself to the world as largely virtuous behavior.
That's exactly it. And it's Gabor Mate and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book
Body keeps
called
score.
That's
Yeah.
the
I was
one.
like, it's up there
There
somewhere.
it is. And yeah, I'm truly grateful to have had the capacity to learn and grow and be guided by both of them. They have been extremely powerful in their own right, and everyone needs to read and look into them. It's not something that has an ego attached to it. It's just another way of thinking that promotes a deeper way of understanding yourself and others. So to go back to why I'm mentioning him is, of course, he wrote a book called When the Body Says No, and how your
Mm.
body works in stress and how stress affects your body. And Dr. Bessel van der Kolk speaks on it as well as about body disassociation, where your mind is too traumatized by an event that it escapes, but your body holds that trauma. Your body
Mm.
carries that trauma, that energy, right? Um, so to go back to your question, a huge part of my asthma was based on my parents' divorce.
Mm.
And a huge part of my asthma was, in fact, me focusing on this aspect of myself, this weakness, so to
Mm.
speak, this victim mentality that I had in myself, because my mum also used it as a huge distraction to not focus on what the actual problem was, the actual issue that we had as a family that we didn't want to confront.
Yeah.
That it was easier to rather look at your children and see their ailments as the issue, going back to obviously my mum as a rescuer in her own right. That, oh, my daughter's struggling to breathe, let's focus on that. Me sitting in my shortness of breath, overwhelmed by the stress of it, not actually having the capacity to move further in it, that everything I did was very much, I can't because I can't breathe.
Mm.
Whereas now, and building up to having worked with this physiotherapist, the first thing she asked me, she's like, what do you want to do that you can't do because of your breath?
Mm.
And I said to her, I want to climb Table Mountain and I can't. I want to have a child and I don't think I'd be able to.
Mm.
Okay, granted, I haven't had a child yet, but I know I'd be able to. But I'm a trail runner now. We run up Table Mountain. I'm a boxer. I work in my own space because I actually have the capacity to breathe and to learn about my breath. And by breathing and by learning about my breath, not only am I connecting to the present moment, but I'm connecting to my body. And I'm
Mm.
listening to what my body needs and what my body wants, because my body is what is here. My body is what is holding me into this present moment. So it's very important that from that body disassociation, coming back to yourself, coming back to the present moment, you acknowledge the parts of your body that need confronting.
Yeah.
And that's where this idea of breath work, of listening to your body, of really focusing on this moment brings you back into alignment with yourself.
Yeah. And I don't think I previously gave much credence to the idea that there were kind of like areas of the body in which energy or like trapped feeling could reside. But another great person who you may have come across in your breath work, he's called Stuart Sanderman. I mention him, I swear, like at every other one of these conversations because he's written very, very thoughtfully and very practically about how people can access breath work as this kind of really good tool, not as this slightly esoteric exercise. But also I went to one of his classes largely by accident because it was provided by the office space that I was working in at the time, and had an exceptionally cathartic kind of moment that was hugely, hugely releasing. But in his book, he has a table of which I don't think it was his research, but it was part of the kind of ancient breathwork tradition about where certain feelings reside. And I was like looking around the body, and it was like I've always, for a long time, I've had some weirdness with my left shoulder, and it turned out the kind of the left shoulder kind of energy was about kind of resenting yourself. And that was the only of all of these things on the table, that was the only thing I could have ever said that I was guilty of doing or had a predilection for. So it was weird to me that my most persistent kind of like trappedness, range of motion, sticky issue with my body also related to that one psychological thing. As soon as I heard that, I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a bit more to this.
Everyone has the same truth, they just speak it in a language that only a few understand. And with everything that everyone is teaching, we are all here for the good of all, and we are all here to help guide people back home to their most authentic selves.
Yeah.
So it's in that language and in that understanding that we can truly give back to people so that people can reassociate to their bodies and thereby reassociate to the present moment.
Yeah. That journey isn't a straightforward one, even if it's an immensely necessary and powerful one. In one of your campfire videos, you spoke to the fact that I think it was the one about navigating triggers, and like the projections we can all be guilty of kind of like putting out into the world, and that it was better off feeling the emotions than fighting them. Like, what would you say if you were speaking to someone, and I guess in some ways, I fight some of my emotions, even if I think I've got some clarity and capacity to feel them broadly. But say I was a particularly ardent kind of fighter of my emotions, what would you advocate based on your life experience and your deep knowledge in a few different areas as the first step a kind of fighter can take to become a more open-minded kind of feeler of their emotions?
Well, the first question I ask is, why are you fighting it? Like, what are you doing that you don't want? Why don't you want to confront what's happening, and what are you afraid of? It's something I could be wrong here, but if originally I think it was Carl Jung that said, where your fear is, there is your task. And it's something that is so true. It's so true because of how much we fear and how little it has to do with our life. And where we are in our space and where someone might be, where they are fighting their own thoughts, they end up living in such a false reality, not only with themselves, but they end up also not being able to connect around to the people around them. They're not truly authentic in any right, and then they become insecure. They become triggered easily. They become overwhelmed easily. They sometimes struggle with anxiety or depression because they've got so much in their mind that they just don't want to confront because they're worried of how deep it will go. But I actually mentioned it in an interview I did with Lau Lima, is if you think of people as onions, going back to Shrek, shout outs, still vibes.
To this day.
It'll never die. Honestly, it's one of my favorites. But if you think of us as onions and you think of us having to peel back those layers, that you can't just peel back one layer of the onion. You have to get to the core. But you have to start by peeling off those exterior layers.
Mm.
Unfortunately, in where your fear lies is at that core.
Mm.
And you slowly and gently have to peel off the layers. However, everything works in cycles and in loops, and the universe will always send you a lesson until you've learned from it. So it'll come to you in different types of ways. And that's what these layers are. They're helping you, building you, strengthening you for the next layer.
Yeah.
They're building you to understand how to respond to the next lesson, to go deeper into that core with whatever knowledge you need to heal from it.
Yeah.
That you can only be afraid of your own truth if you're afraid of it. If you're not afraid of it, you'll be able to really just knock it out of the park, really just go straight in head first, because you have created the fear around your own truth. You're the only thing stopping you from living your best life. And that's where that fighter mentality is very convoluted, because it's kind of taking that step back at, I actually don't want to start. I don't want to do it because I'd rather just be here. I'd
Mm.
rather just be here with this nail in my shoulder that's so sore,
Yeah.
instead of pulling it out, because if I pull it out, then I might bleed to death. But instead, you're going to pull it out and you're going to feel so much relief because
Mm.
there's no nail in your shoulder, you know? So
Yeah,
there's
and I
this.
think there's a good crossover with the Bessel van der Kolk stuff in terms of like, I don't think people appreciate that quite readily. It's like, okay, well, you can either deal with this and also be free of potentially not only the immediate term discomfort and potentially a long-term health impact, or you can have both, you know, because you know that will do something. The body will keep score or reflect that in a way that that is not purely kind of psychological discomfort. So, you know, it's
Exactly.
double victory potentially to be had from one courageous action. And I think that I captured that thought as soon as you said it. Is like, because I think that was a beautiful simple summary of that 15-minute video on the campfire, is about projections. Is the universe will always send you lessons, the same lesson until because what you're experiencing is to some huge degree a projection that you create. You know, so no
Exactly.
wonder the lesson is the same, and that's a sign that, hey,
Exactly.
okay, there's something to be dealt with here, not something to be deflected or pushed off and then wonder why it keeps coming up again.
Exactly. Exactly. If you see people as mirrors, for
Yeah,
example.
the mirrors thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the idea of everyone as a reflection of you and showing you different versions of yourself that you either need to appreciate, acknowledge, or move past. And it's in these spaces of being triggered or being called into a space that your reflection is something that you're not willing to look at, that your healing begins. Your growth can go deeper, and the lesson is there to learn.
Mm.
It's, I don't know if you can see it, but it's that tattoo that I have. It's the spiral,
Yeah.
and it's the idea of the spiral of life, that you grow through a lesson, and when you move through it, a deeper version of that same lesson comes in. That, cool, you figured this layer out. Now I can show you what I actually wanted to show you, because I couldn't show you if you didn't learn how to heal from that first.
Mm. So quite a nice, you could almost imagine that on a kind of like three-dimensional level, because the spiral on your finger obviously is like the rings get larger, but what you've
Exactly.
also talked about is the depth getting broader. So it's almost like you can, if you, unless you tackle these layers or the things preventing you to getting to the next one, you'll live at this kind of like, you know, small
Yeah.
rotations top
Yeah.
level. But then if you go a bit deeper, you go deeper and your life gets broader and wider, and you know, until
Exactly.
you can't continue to do it within the realms of the
Exactly.
Zoom window.
You just get lost within yourself. You get lost in your headspace, and it's just, there's not a lot of space up there.
And it's best spent doing lots of other things, being creative, being connected, not fretting and worrying about stuff
Mm.
that ultimately is in your control, even if it's painful in the moment to see it that way. You know, I think lots of people struggle with the idea that their anxiety is something that they have some autonomy and agency to kind of discard. You know, that's a Seneca Stoic thought. It's like, well, my anxiety is mine. It's something that I've created, even if, you know, you could objectively attribute it to having some kind of external catalyst. It's still
Mm.
something that happens here. So with a deep breath, it's something I can work on discarding. I wondered if you had any comment on how society at large, be it as you see it in South Africa or have a sense for it more broadly, successfully kind of deprioritizes or de-incentivizes people from doing that kind of self-work, when in truth it's unbelievably powerful for the individual, but also, everybody.
That's amazing. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is a phrase that you can only meet someone as deeply as they've met themselves. So what happens is, and it's my favorite topic, is the divine masculine and feminine, and what that truly means, and why we feel that we can't be those people, or at least those archetypes, in balance. And it's a very, very distorted image that has been created from the societal, since the Industrial Revolution, of man and woman, and this segregation, this immediate split between who each are and what each role is. That when you think masculine and feminine, you think man and woman, where actually the masculine and the feminine are so much deeper than the role models that you might perhaps have in your mind when you think masculine or feminine. Normally people think masculine, they think of their paternal figure, and feminine as their maternal figure. But these are still humans. Humans aren't perfect. We still make errors and mistakes. And the idea behind what you had mentioned now about people not having that self-compassion and not having that empathy is because having any feminine qualities has only recently been accepted. It has been such a difficult procedure, especially for men, to be able to acknowledge any feminine energy within them without it being disgraced, or without them being seen as a specific type of person. That growing up, even still in our generation, boys weren't allowed to feel their emotions. That now in their late 20s and 30s and 40s, they are kind of going through extreme midlife crises. A lot of men statistically have more suicidal rates because they cannot truly acknowledge the way they feel, because they were never taught how to regulate their emotions, because that's not manly. And that ends up becoming this toxic masculinity that's powered by the ego, which is just your personality. It's just your personality trying to find a way to balance this good and bad within you, that you end up following the wrong truth. A toxic masculinity is very aggressive. It's very indecisive. It's very, straightforward and harsh. Whereas a toxic feminine energy is also a thing. Just as a man can not have a feminine, or at least not welcome in the feminine energy within them, the compassion, the intuition, the empathy, a woman can also completely neglect the masculine. A woman can become very erratic, can become very emotional, because she also has had terrible experiences with men in the past because of this toxic masculinity, that she's kind of pushed them to the side. And this imbalance of the masculine and the feminine in both states has caused such a confusion as to what each means within you and what that role plays within you. The masculine is the instinct. The feminine is the intuition. The masculine is the external. The feminine is the internal. Together, they are in harmony. The instinct relies on the intuition to work, and the intuition relies on the instinct to follow. There's a beautiful symbiotic relationship that flows that is completely disconnected because of the Industrial Revolution and the ripples that has caused in our world today. That we at this point in our lives don't know where to start. We don't know what the tools are. We don't know what we need to focus on, because it's so deeply ingrained in us of who we are, that doing something different goes back to that fear. It goes back to that idea of, but I don't feel that bad. I surely don't have to go that deep into everything I am. Or, no, man, I don't need to be more feminine, because in my mind, feminine is flowers and rainbows. Or I don't need to be more masculine because in my mind, masculine means man, and man doesn't make sense to me. So there's just this full misguided information on what the truth is behind true alignment, and also how you can truly come back to yourself in that way. So just to tie a ribbon on your question, it gives you the opportunity to dive into a deeper version of yourself by being self-compassionate. Everything that you want from others, give it to yourself first. Give those feelings, those emotions, those external triggers to yourself. I don't feel seen. See yourself. I don't feel heard. Listen to yourself. What are these things within you that you are not confronting, and rather seeing the reflections of the feelings that you're feeling in others? That by dealing with these emotions, by truly working on yourself as they come up, by journaling, I highly recommend journaling to all my clients. It's an incredible way to release the subconscious thoughts and help your sleep, and thereby just help your wakeful state. But it is a great way of releasing and finishing the sentences in your mind. That's a huge way of helping you understand yourself better. And by doing so, exactly as you said, give more, be more, and be more present in someone's life, that you can help them on their journey too. You can ask them questions instead of like, how's work going? How's this? You can ask them like, how are you doing? What's been happening in your life? What are your dreams? What are you doing to pursue those dreams? How can I be of service to you? And vice versa. It's that energy exchange that comes from healing yourself first.
But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That how have we come to look at human life and how it functions best through the lens of just the last 150, 60 years since the Industrial Revolution?
It's the same idea as, you'll never reach that level of enlightenment, or you'll never reach that level of truth that you are consistently working in. It's actually, I recently watched the Testament of Moses, and the whole idea that Moses got people out of the promised land, but he never, out of Egypt, but he never actually made it to the promised land. His role in their lives was to save them from Egypt. That he was never going to see the promised land. And I think to answer your question with that in mind, I see myself at the start of the graph, quite literally at zero. Okay. That I don't see as being a human and as learning and on this path, is that I am often going back in my self-assurance, and I'm often reassessing my own space, and sometimes might go into a bit of a loop and go into my own type of wave, that if I look at the graph as it is, I would find it flows the entire time consistently. There's no straight line. And where I am in my space, I think putting them on an axis and seeing how they actually work within my life is quite an interesting perspective on who I believe myself to be right now, who I was, and who I'm becoming. And if I look at it from that line, I can definitely, from where I am now until from where I started to where I am now, I would say it was probably about like a good slope like this. Okay. Whereas now I think it's more of a slope like that, if I had to think about it, where it gives, you can never be fully, in my mind, in my understanding at least, you can never fully be both. You either are self-aware or you're self-assured. Your assurance in yourself comes from being self-aware, that you don't necessarily need to have that constant reassurance. You don't need to reassure yourself in situations and moments when you are aware of said feelings and triggers and reflections and beings in those moments, that you could potentially even go straight up and just be self-aware and not move in your self-assurance. So it's an interesting placement, I must say. I did think about it when I saw it, and I was thinking about how that graph where I would place myself. It was something that I knew you would ask. And it's truly something I've been thinking about, because if I look at my state now and my last week, for example, and how self-assured I've been versus how self-aware I've been, I have definitely been more self-aware than I have been self-assured. But the week before that, I was neither self-assured nor self-aware.
I was initially fascinated by your idea that you perceived yourself as being in the corner, but was that in large part because you see the real potential for depth of self-awareness and depth of self-assurance? So it was almost as if the axis was like infinite
Exactly.
value. So you couldn't
Yes.
really be anything but on like a
Exactly.
human level, right at the plumb in the bottom left-hand corner.
Exactly.
Which I think is a really, really interesting take. Practically speaking, though, for someone like, do you have one or two or three things that you will do to kind of check in with yourself to assure that kind of like your average position on that very hypothetical matrix is a strong, robust, happy one, or just steps you'll take, going forward to make sure that, okay, well, even if I'm here at the moment, I have a funny feeling if I do these three things, I'll get to a slightly kind of like, again, more strong, happy, robust place, thinking quite practically. Does something come to mind?
Yeah, I think there's lots of ways that self-assurance and self-awareness work hand in hand. That by being self-aware, naturally you are giving yourself that self-assurance. That the ways you can check in with yourself are simply what we had discussed earlier about being potentially in a situation that you're not comfortable in, being in a space or being around people that don't resonate with you, or doing something that you don't want to do, about setting that boundary. A big thing and a big theme of this month has been that setting a boundary of acknowledging your no and respecting your no, knowing that you can say no without feeling guilty or having to apologize. And that's where the self-assurance comes in. That's where you can truly say that I am doing what I want to do for me, and knowing that it's not being selfish, but it is also for the greater good. Because if we move it to smaller terms, like, I won't be good company if I go to a place that I don't want to be at. It's better that I don't go. Or I won't give my all if you put me in a situation that I don't want to be in, because I don't want to be, I don't want to be there. But it goes in a larger scheme of things, where if we go to a larger extent and we look at childhood traumas and we look at sexual abusers and that space, that being able to stand up for yourself in that way and giving yourself that self-assurance starts your journey of self-awareness. That you can say no, you can be truly trusting in yourself, being able to truly say no and believe in yourself and step into that power. Because once you start that journey, then it will consistently flow. There's never going back in those sort of things. You become more self-aware. Oh, I didn't really like doing that. Let me think about how that affected me. Let me think about how I can be better in that situation. And your self-awareness grows after the self-assurance, after you've given yourself your validation and your respect.
And there's quite a nice relationship with what you were saying about self-awareness earlier, about like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to go to X party because I'm self-aware enough to know that I'm feeling a certain way, and those kind of parties don't really work for me. But also there's a nice crossover between having that self-awareness and going, well, is that something I perpetually want to be true? Is there some growth to be had by me taking a deep breath and trying to be more mentally available in those moments? Am I cheating myself out of some connection with other people, or using my self-awareness, my apparent self-awareness, as this kind of enabling belief to not do things? Sometimes that's an impeccable suggestion because you do really understand yourself intimately well. Sometimes it's an enabling belief where you cheat yourself out of, joy or opportunity for engagement or growth, simply because you feel you know yourself too well. And I have a little of it, like a hypothetical thing where you're at a kind of an away day or kind of sports day with your work, and you've been there for like 6 months and you've really committed and shown people how capable you are. You're really good at pulling the reports together, and people love you. They really respect you as this person that can deliver work. But then there's this sports day activity where you have to kind of like catch things and like run up this thing and jump off it. And, you've never felt entirely comfortable with your kind of like physical self in that respect. So, you think, okay, no, I don't want to present that version of myself. I know that will work against this image I've created. When in truth, the other self-awareness dialogue kicks in about like, okay, there's an opportunity for growth here. If I can commit to this and be content with this, regardless of the outcome, whether I catch every ball or drop every one, just committing to it honestly and with a happy frame of mind is going to do something for me. And then, the happy byproduct of my little example was that, that vulnerability, actually did then, impress and enlighten a lot of other people. That empowered lots of other people to do the same. So,
Exactly.
I think we can be guilty sometimes of using our self-awareness as like an enabling belief to not do things, when actually at its best, it's a little dialogue, like you've got you're a really supportive, loving friend with you all of the time. And that occasionally that loving, supportive friend is going to encourage you to do something you don't immediately feel comfortable doing. And you've got
Exactly.
to go, okay, this is it. This is the time I need to lean against my initial reaction.
I just want to add to that what you said. I think it's incredibly true and incredibly powerful, because it's through that balance of self-awareness and self-assurance that you can really understand why it is you don't want to do the thing you want to do, or what's being called to you. And again, it's something that I spoke with one of my clients about recently, where she suffered from extreme depression. That she, instead of, when she was depressed, at least she was always in her bed. She didn't want to go out. She didn't want to do anything. So now when something happens, when she's invited somewhere, she says yes only because of the fear of saying no and what that means for her. That her yes is a distorted image of her self-awareness because it falls within her fear. And it's exactly what we spoke about earlier about that discomfort, that it's important to always test yourself and to push yourself and to test your limits and to explore your boundaries in that way. But it's important to also make sure that before you start something, you are self-assured, that you do have that gratitude and that abundance within you, that you're not going into a space with wishes and pleads and ways of being that fall out of line with who you are, who you want to be, who your friends are, what your belief system is, that the what that you're doing is filling your cup and not emptying it. And the who you're doing it with is filling your cup and not emptying it. And why you're doing it is because your cup is already full, that you aren't going into a situation with an empty cup and giving more, because then you aren't self-aware. You've lost that you become that toxic version of yourself where you're doing something because you're afraid of what not doing it might be.
Which is exactly to your parental analogy before. It's like, lots of people have a child and say, I'm not going to do it the way that my mum or dad did it. And in doing so, they kind of overfit. They do the opposite. Even if for what was bad about what their parents did, there was also, some virtues in it, and you're best finding the balance between those 2 points, or the, knowing when to go to either end versus going, nah, it's not that. So therefore it's going to be the complete opposite, which is, as wrong as the other if you're not careful.
He recently had that conversation with my dad about what a shaman is and what shamanism is. And it's something that, exactly as you say, every shaman has their own practice, and we follow the same understanding and we follow the same ideas, but there are so many different facets to the same truth that, as I said, no one is wrong. It's simply about being a vessel of love and light, of giving love freely, of being present and being of service and being willing to help and give for the good of all. That the idea of shamanism is more about working in the other worlds, so to speak. We have if you think of it as a tree, if you think of a tree, for example, you have the roots, you have the trunk, and you have the leaves. In shamanism, if you think of the roots, that's the lower world. That's where your power animals are. That's where your ancestors are. It's where you start the journey of the self by discovering yourself, discovering your roots, truly understanding why you're here, what brought you here, and what your purpose for being here is. Your trunk is then the present moment, the space we're in now, and it's that middle world. It's what is happening around you that you might not be seeing because you've got your eyes set ahead and you're stuck in your mind. That's mostly where my practice is based. The middle world, bringing you back into alignment with yourself in this present moment. The upper world, the trees leaves, is where your spirit guides live. It's where your past loved ones in this life live, who are there to offer you guidance and love, and who are also there to give you your own self-assurance in your own right. That you'll find the upper world comes to visit through insects often. They come in like little bees and butterflies and dragonflies, or you'll feel a little light tap on your shoulder, you'll feel goosebumps around your body. These are all just different ways of acknowledging where we are and truly feeling the truth and belief of what this life is, the connection to nature, honoring the earth and being a part of the earth and nurturing it and helping and giving back in as many ways as we can. And just as we are beings of this earth, we have lost our way so much that how I understand all of these practitioners, whether a shaman, whether a therapist, whether a light healer in their own right, we have just stepped into the role of guidance and holding space for others to realign their mind, body, and spirit connection in whatever right that may mean. With shamanism, and what I do with my practice specifically, is about going with you on your journey through ceremony. And once building that relationship and that connection with you, there's a deep sense of trust and vulnerability that comes from it, that you then allow me to travel with you in your meditations, in your guidance, that we can truly find out what it is that's stopping you, what it is that's limiting you or bringing pain to your body, or whatever comes up, whatever your intention for being in that space is, that the full intention is to bring you back into alignment, to welcome you back home into the fire in your chest.
Yeah, and that comes across so unbelievably powerfully with the campfire output. And obviously I haven't done any of your other practices and all the other channels or vehicles that you might have for that, but that thought about helping people understand or engage with what life is as an existential spiritual felt experience, I think that's the bit that resonates the most to me, and I think comes across so loudly in terms of the spirit and the nature of the content that you do share. And that's what I would definitely advocate it to anybody listening to subscribe, engage, if that's a question or a exploration that you'd like to undertake, and that you would be a fantastic person or guide or mentor, shaman person to facilitate that. I think that's thinking of things that we can forget about with the blinkers on. It's just us as in our existential context. I often think of it that there's an infinity in that direction, and there's infinity in that direction and that one, but yet here we are, we've got this cherished, absolute glittering moment of cognition and engagement with other people. And criminally, for all of the things we talked about earlier about societal conditioning, the Industrial Revolution, etc., people have that stolen from them. So it's the work and joy of a lifetime to re-engage, to fight off some of the conditions and re-engage with the idea of what life is, even if it's a big question to tackle that requires a lot of introspection and self-work. It takes people who are living a life of service, a really knowing, loving, compassionate one like you, to help people do that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very difficult process, and just to add, it's a lot to do with unlearning. It's a lot to do with figuring out what you were taught to be right and learning what you feel is right. and then figuring out how deep that actually goes.
At its heart, it's a really smart, simple and safe journaling format to use. But with that at its center, there's so many things that kind of make it kind of optimized and optimal, interesting and insightful, and just, I find utterly invaluable as a tool in my day-to-day life. Whilst it can help anybody, it is particularly useful if you fall into any of the following kind of positions. If you're trying to transition through a difficult moment in your life/year, as I was at the time of having the idea, then it's really, really helpful. If you are keen to grow a bit more consistently and in order to achieve more of the things you'd like to and feel better on that journey of achievement, then it can be really good. If you'd like to be also a bit more self-aware and self-assured, so you can become a kind of work on your people management skills, your people leadership, that it's also really helpful for. It will cost you absolutely nothing. And for that low fee, you get access to all of the key features. Nothing is trapped behind a paywall. You can subscribe to remove ads or set up coaching with me to help you make the most of the kind of data and insights that you generate. But all features, access to insights and interactive experiences are there for any user to use. If you fancy giving it a try, visit NoWastedDays.io. Sign up for free and let me know either on the contact form or on socials how you get on. In the meantime, back to more great insights from Michaela.